Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hi, Paula. How are you?
I'm good, Helga. Nice to see you.
It's so great to see you. And even more importantly, it's great to be here this afternoon and just to share this time with you in this time and to feel how we are continuing to do our work.
That's right. So important.
And so this is a festival that we're starting and that we are embarking on. And it's the National Sawdust Digital Discovery Festival. Let's talk about it a little bit and let people know what it is.
Absolutely. Well, today is our first masterclass, which I'm really excited to launch with Reena and Vijay, and I'll introduce them in a second.
Okay.
But yeah, we have two series. It's actually three, two that have launched. One is the Discovery series, where we really bring forward voices of incredible artists into people's living rooms, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then masterclasses with artists who really help us kind of dive into their performance practice, ways in which they're coping in the world that we hope will really bridge and elucidate this new normal together. So
Yeah.
those are the two, and then eventually we launch a new series for composers, and that'll be in May. And this is all part of an anonymous, incredible donation that was really brought to us with the intention to help support artists directly. So we feel really humbled and honored to be able to do just that.
It's such an amazing thing. And like you're saying, to get support to artists directly, which is
Yes,
great.
exactly,
And it's
exactly.
our community and yeah, it's really, really beautiful to be able to continue doing our work. I see that we have some guests here, Vijay and Reena. Tell us a little bit about them before they tell us about themselves.
Absolutely. So Reena Esmail and I actually went to Juilliard together. It's a joy to have her here.
Oh,
And just a little bit about her music. She's long been involved through her music with bringing together the words of Indian and Western classical music, and also bringing together communities through the creation of equitable music spaces.
oh,
She's written for all sorts of ensembles, from the LA Master Chorale, where she's in residence, to the Kronos Quartet with upcoming works for Seattle Symphony and more. She was also a 2019 United States Artist Fellow in Music, and a Kennedy Center Citizen Artist Fellow. And
oh.
right by her is Vijay Gupta, who's a brilliant violinist, MacArthur winner, and the founder of Street Symphony, which is a nonprofit organization that brings together musical engagement, dialogue, and teaching artistry for homeless and incarcerated communities in Los Angeles. They have worked together, and I believe they met when Reena was a composer in residence for the Street Symphony, and now they've been creatively intertwined for years. And today we're going to hear Reena's music, which I'm really excited about, and specifically a piece called Darshan, which we understand has been a decade in the making. I hope I got that right.
Wow.
But it's such an honor to have the two of them here with us. I follow both of their feeds, and it has provided such solace for me in terms of seeing how Reena as a composer constantly challenges herself in terms of refining her process, and then Vijay in terms of his daily commitment to his practice, and these beautiful moments, that poetic moments, like, the difference between isolation or solitude, things that have guided me as a practitioner. So it's very exciting to start with them, and we'll maybe just start with hearing about Darshan, or leading us into your work, Reena.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so great to be here. It's so great to see both of you, and it's so great to be with all of you online who are listening in. Our communities have changed a lot, but I
Yeah.
mean, I think as artists, we practice creativity with our art form, but I mean, this is a time to be creative in our systems and in our just ways of being with one another. So we're really happy to join you in this new creative practice. So yeah, I wrote Darshan and have been writing it for since 2017. I've been working with Vijay on this piece, and it's interesting because Darshan, the word Darshan in Hindi means seeing. It means actually to have kind of like a vision of God in a certain way, and there are sometimes moments in our creative practice where that creative practice allows us to see each other more deeply, and I really think that's what this piece was.
Mm. And darshan is also tied to the kind of typical greeting that you'll see in a yoga studio in New York or in LA, or our typical greeting in India, which is namaskar, namaste, which quite literally means that I see the divinity in you, and I recognize what's in you is reflected in me. And I have been on, as I'm sure all of us have been, dozens and dozens and dozens of Zoom calls. And I had this image come to my mind yesterday. It's almost like we're looking at this gemstone that instead of facets of a crystal being cut, every single facet is a mirror reflecting ourselves to ourselves. And so in that way, I feel like we're just taking a closer look at what was already there. We're actually being able to see a part of ourselves that perhaps was aching for nourishment and for attention. And we, especially as artists, find ourselves immersed in this deep wilderness of trying to make sense of our world around us, not only for ourselves, but for the people who we love and for the people who we don't yet know. And so for us, darshan is a way of seeing what we know is already there, but also seeing the unseen, seeing the unknown, a pathway forward to discover and co-create this world.
I love that. You know, two things just jump out at me with just this idea of like long processes, right? And discovering a
Yes.
work kind of through, you know, through years with someone, and also that kind of spiritual trust and connection that you share as collaborators. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the work just over the past couple years? And also, you mentioned co-create. And Helga and I have had a lot of conversations about co-creation and about how, you know, in science, you see people who win Nobel Prizes and they win them together. Whereas in our field, if you say you collaborate, somehow you're lesser than. What does
Yes.
that mean to kind of take ownership over this idea of co-creation? And can you talk a little bit about process and co-creation?
Yeah, that's actually a really beautiful question, and one that we've learned through the process of creating this piece with each other. You know, it started, I mean, before we were together as partners, you know, we were just friends, and I had a deep practice in Indian classical music, and Vijay had a deep practice as a Western classical violinist, and there's this exchange that happens between the composer and the performer when you don't co-create, where you put the double bar line on the piece and then you hand it over, and then it's their job to realize it. And as you keep on working and as you start thinking of this space of co-creation, that it's not this, it just kind of starts to go like this, and it starts to, and eventually it becomes this really intertwined thing at every phase of the process. But it's both of us learning to trust each other, honestly.
Mm.
For me to trust that, for me to even sing to him and then hear back what he plays back to me, and then write from that place instead of just from the place of my own mind. But then on the other hand, it creates this richness, because I mean, I can't know every sound someone is going to make. I can't know every possible thing. And this idea that we see composers as these gods who just magically come up with these genius things. I mean, I'm not that. I'm just taking in what I'm hearing, and the better the ideas, and the richer the quality of the ideas that any artist is coming to me with, the better my ability to help them realize that thing and to realize it together.
Paula, I think the word that is the most terrifying word is ownership. Truly. Because although I was, deeply versed in a Western classical practice, I had perhaps a deeper ancestral ache to understand Indian classical music, to understand Hindustani classical music. And so working on darshan, working with Reena, was also immersing myself in my greatest fear, which is that I wouldn't be enough in the face of my own culture. And that a lot of what was the beginning of the process of working on darshan was me freaking out and saying, I need to go to India and actually study Indian classical music before I'm worthy to play your music. And Reena said, no, that's not true. You have to come to this based on where you are. And I'd like to think about this process of co-creation as much about a process of manifesting as it is about unmanifesting. I think perhaps the role of composer and performer is for the composer to take something from unmanifest and make it manifest in some way. And then perhaps for the performer to understand how to deconstruct that so that the work goes back into unmanifest in the hearts and minds and brains and souls of the listeners and the recipients of that gift. And so to kind of move back and forth between these places is truly its own kind of dance.
Vijay, would you say a little bit about how you feel that principle applies to the moment we're in now, just as humans. And as we're trying to understand what moment we're in and how we move forward and how we are intertwined and actually needing in deep need of collaboration with one another.
Mm. We can't do this alone. And we are fooling ourselves if we think that we can. And I think the longer we spend in solitude, not isolation, but solitude, where we have a deep, rich understanding of who we are, the cocoon, the chrysalis that we're in at this moment just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think what we're doing is we're turning ourselves into soup. And there's that beautiful Radiolab episode around the butterfly that just, came out recently. And I feel like we're in this moment where we're rewiring, the world is rewiring, but we have no idea what the manifestation of the connections will be. And we cannot rush that manifestation. I think musicians and artists right now are vying, understandably, to say, "Hey, I'm still here. Look at me. Here's my daily Bach post." I'm totally guilty of it. But it's also to say we shouldn't rush the manifestation. So it's an act of deep trust.
Can we hear the piece?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to start with a little bit of maybe the process. I will sing a phrase and Vijay will play the beginning of the piece, and then from there we'll move into the actual full piece. All right, here's Darshan.
Just adjusting the gain on the mic.
That was stunning.
Wow.
Wow. What a gift. Thank
Wow.
you both.
I was trying so hard not to cry today, you know? Here's a thing that I find really interesting about the work too, and you tell me where or how far away from your intention I am, but it really feels like praying.
Mm.
Yeah.
It feels, and in the way that prayer can be slow because you don't always know what you want when you begin to pray. And I mean prayer, not even necessarily in a religious sense, in the way that we talk about what we feel, what we desire, our questions.
Mm.
Uh, and so you begin with this one figure, and I feel that it just continues to ask the same question, but reveal itself completely differently in each step. And that the work of the piece, and I feel in some way the work of all of us now is to stay with the questions.
Absolutely. I think we talk about staying with the questions all the time because, it's not even getting to the answers, it's getting to the next question, that brings us to a certain place. This work, I think you're so right to have picked up on that energy about the work because, I mean, aside from just the work, being about prayer, about seeing God, I think it's so much about our intention and what we wanted for this work to be. And it's interesting because we did a recording of it on New Year's Eve at a church here in Los Angeles at All Saints Episcopalian, sorry. And
Don't get them mixed up.
but it was amazing because we were just there to use the space, and because we have a lot of wonderful people who offered that space to us, and it was so beautiful. And as we were sitting waiting for the recording engineer to set up, I said to Vijay, I was like, I think we should start going to this church. I mean, I just feel like this deep connection to this church. And I think sometimes when you write a piece that puts a certain energy into the world, things find you, like that energy finds you again. And we found just time and time again, working on this piece in its various stages, that different energies have found us.
Helga, I feel like what you really hit on the head for me, or illuminated for me rather, is the very nature of Hindustani classical music, as I understand it, because this music is about revealing what might already be known with such dedication. And truly, the word in Sanskrit is the word sadhana. That's how we say practice, but sadhana can also be worship. And that, in a sense, what you come away with is far more questions than answers. This piece is actually based on a Hindustani raga called Charukeshi, and Charukeshi is a raga about grief.
Mm.
And you hear in this raga both what we in the Western canon might call major and minor, but the truth is that I feel like grief is as much about praise as it is about deep, deep sorrow as well.
It's incredible. And that's the thing about grief, is that it doesn't only come in one emotion, it comes in all these colors. And that's what we felt and heard in that music. We have a lot of questions coming at us, which is very exciting, from people in their homes. And so I had, sorry, go ahead, Helga.
I was muted. I just
Oh,
want to read this one to you. How are you finding your creative practice has changed during this time? For example, being at home, small spaces, having more time to spend together as collaborators and as partners too, right?
Yeah. Do you want to?
Well, we haven't ripped each other to shreds.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
a
we're
really
both here.
good beginning. In fact, we got married in the middle of February, and so we feel like this
Oh,
it
wow.
was perfect timing, and this is kind of like our extended honeymoon in a
Has been,
way. And
yeah.
I actually feel like, in a strange sense, at least for me, this time has allowed me to really face and embrace the challenges I've been wanting to put in front of myself for a very long time,
Can
which
you
is
name one or two?
certainly will first of all to develop a deeper reading practice, to
mm,
develop a practice of actually recording myself, which I used to find utterly terrifying. And so actually it's interesting, before the quarantines had started, before COVID had started, I started a project of posting a minute of a movement of unaccompanied Bach every day. And that's kind of been my solace of understanding who I am as a musician. But also this process of constantly asking questions. And so, in some way, too, it's like, okay, will I finally call myself out and do the things I've been saying I'll do when I have time?
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting because, we have our space. We're here in our very sexy garage. I know it looks great, but this is where we are, and we have spaces that are isolated and set up for us to both do our work without necessarily hearing each other. But it's interesting that I'm realizing that the only live music I'm actually hearing is Vijay practicing, and it's really interesting just to think, how just those strains of violin through our patio are really the live sounds that I hear. But it's been amazing also to think, in a strange way, that we write the piece that we need to hear at the
Mm.
time. And I
Mm.
was thinking about that just this morning, is that, how many times have I written a piece that maybe, the program notes say that it has this big thing to do in the world, and really I'm just writing it for myself. I'm writing it because I need that piece. And so I realized that, strangely, at this time, I've been writing pieces that have so much more connection and collaboration with people. I took this little challenge on myself I guess it was more than a month ago, where I offered to just write a piece, for no charge, for someone who wanted a piece, because I had a little bit more time in my schedule. And what came about were these amazing requests that, like, performers had been sitting on for years, that they wouldn't have had the bandwidth to think about or ask about, pieces for parents and children, pieces for partners who were, going through different places in their practices, and pieces that were really about the relationships between people, and people who were spending a lot of time together and who, loved each other very deeply. And so, I mean, thinking about being a composer to write a piece for people, as opposed to necessarily writing a piece for an instrument or a situation, I'm thinking so differently about that in this time.
And Reena, we have a question here from someone who says, can you tell us more about why you chose Raj Charukeshi as as the raga for Darshan?
Yeah, well,
Maybe just how you came upon that?
yeah, I'm not sure whether the person who asked knows Indian rags, but if so, I mean, it's interesting that I try to find places between Indian and Western practice that are kind of resonant and significant in both. There are things that we hear, just like I'm saying, we hear major and minor scales, as Vijay
Mhm.
was saying. We hear things and they mean something to us, and I try to find those places. So in this case, the bottom half of Charukeshi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is major, and 5, 6, 7, 8 is natural minor. And so when you cross, those paths, and kind of in the middle is a whole tone scale, in the middle is an octatonic scale, depending on how you do it. I mean, that's the technical element behind it. But you can be in completely different worlds just based on what notes you choose to associate with each other. And it's 7 simple notes, and yet it's this universe. And so I thought I have these points in my life where I get obsessed with different ragas, and at this point it was Charukeshi. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I have one question just for Vijay. Right before you played, you said that you felt that, you were scared almost to jump into this collaboration. Was it the right thing to do? Can you talk a little bit about, spiritually what changed as you came into working into, in Reena's music through these kind of traditional practices that are part of your heritage, but that weren't necessarily part of your everyday practice, and what has changed for you since embarking on this, and what other pieces are you planning to do together?
Hmm. It's a really beautiful question, Pal, and I hesitate to answer in a way that would seem as if this is tied up in a bow and done.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so
So
totally not.
not.
That
Yeah.
I think every day I find more frayed edges of my spirit and my
Mm,
soul than I knew were there. And I think actually, as musicians, we often think that we do something, we do music. And sometimes more recently, I've been thinking, I wonder if music does us. And I wonder if actually um, this Charukeshi, this movement, frankly, Reena's love, is almost this kind of chisel that gets to like breaking up all the armor inside me so I can actually see what's there.
yeah.
Um, and so, in a sense, I'm thinking about an amazing book called The Music Room, which is by Namita Devidayal. And in the very opening preface of the book, I think it's a prologue, she talks about her teacher practicing the raga Bhairavi. And Bhairavi is the name of one of our goddesses in the Hindu pantheon. And she says that she has a vision of the goddess as she's practicing her morning sadhana, as she's actually singing her warm up. And so, in a sense, I feel like the vision, the darshan that I've been having in this piece, but also in all the music I've been playing, is to try to have some way of letting that divinity become realized so
Hmm.
I can have a sense of who I am. In a sense, we're all holding up mirrors to ourselves,
Yeah.
even when we're talking to other people.
Well, and I feel like, especially in Western practice, which, Rena and I feel like we kind of grew up through this very kind of, um, how do you say, this net that kind of kept you in. There's fear involved in everything we do. And just last night, my husband said to me, we've been married for 15 years and you've never asked me to play my cello. And I thought, oh my God, you're right. And I realized like he's an expert. Like I don't get to do that. And I think there's so many ways in which like that was so ingrained in me, this idea that like I don't deserve to do that. Like that's just not.
Oh, wow.
So I love this idea that, that perhaps some of this moment in solitude, we're working through things that are fear-based, that perhaps we give ourselves permission to work through. And we
Absolutely.
Mm.
do have more questions coming in from the audience. Helga, do you want to take one?
Um, what is the relationship between the two classical music practices, classical Indian and Western classical music?
A really good question, and it's interesting because I think what they truly have in common, or I guess maybe I'll start with their differences. They really emphasize different things. So with I guess with Hindustani music, there is really only one melodic line, but that melodic line is incredibly complex and nuanced, and it's based on this improvised tradition. So typically speaking, I mean, it's very hard to even imagine what something like that would look when it's written down, which is why it took so long to write this piece down, and why it started from me just singing to Vijay and Vijay, playing it back. Western music, I think, has this element of many people needing to align with each other. So once notation happened in Western music about 1,000 years ago, we started thinking vertically. We started thinking about harmony and counterpoint. So the great thing about these two traditions is they don't really step on one another's toes because we can support a really robust, complex melody with harmony, with counterpoint, and that's kind of where I feel my practice is in taking these two disparate things that are so developed in different ways and bringing them together. But then the way that I think that they're the same is actually the culture of them is kind of similar. You know, the same way that I and Paula and all of us have trained with these teachers over long years, and put in hours a day of practice and you're just in silence there by yourself. That's exactly the same way the Hindustani musicians train. So often when they meet each other, when Western and Hindustani musicians meet, they find that they have a lot in common as people as far as their life experience has been. And then, they kind of dive into the differences of the music from that shared humanity.
Yes. So they find each other there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned something in one of your, I don't know, just this idea of like creative practice extending beyond the music we make. If Mary Kamujian, an incredible composer, mentioned, she's not writing music right now. That's what she's giving to herself. She needs to not write. But not writing doesn't mean not creating. Not singing doesn't mean you're not a vocalist, right? So how can you give us a few examples for some people out there that are feeling not in solitude, but in isolation and may need to see themselves creatively practicing in different ways? Some examples.
I really love this question, Paula, because I feel like as artists, it's actually a time for us to understand what generosity really means, for us to really mean generosity, and to not pay lip service to wanting to be kind, but to really truly do it. And I actually find that the intention of a creative practice ultimately is a kind of care. And so I think there are many ways for us to be creatively caring to each other. Um, One of the things that I was lucky to feel called to launch when we started to move into quarantine was something called artist office hours. And every day at 5 p.m. Pacific time, I just hold an hour-long Zoom call. And it's a chance for artists to call in from wherever they are, and to talk and to share and to give us an update, to say, I wrote something, I didn't write something, I was brave enough to put on my mask and go grocery shopping today, but to check in. And I feel like I'm finding a lot of creativity in ways to actually be generous to myself and be generous in caring. So that's manifested as a daily exercise routine, a meditation practice, a reading practice, a journaling practice. I'm finding that to finally do Julia Cameron's morning pages after many years of wanting to do it is an amazing practice. And for folks who don't necessarily know morning pages, that's a great way too. And Reena has her own rituals and practices.
Yeah, we've
too.
been learning from each other's rituals and practices. I mean, I also think that creativity is also about taking in a situation and seeing what a situation is. And, especially, I mean, for those of us who are working musicians, this is the time where we would be traveling and we'd be putting out, putting out, and putting out. And I was thinking, how many Aprils have I been on these long, dark orchestra deadlines where it's just me and it's just me in a room by myself. There's no one there, and you see that piece comes out and it's in the world, and it seems like it was created from this place of like, relationship and light and stuff. But the actual practice is so dark, and so I'm using this time right now to think about, how do I have relationship and how do I start from relationship? And like, does something creative come from that relationship? Is it even music? I mean, is it just seeing the other person for who they are? Is it just having a conversation? And so I think the intake is really important. And, I mean, the other thing I will say is that we have the ability right now to create the community we want to see, because how many times are you in a place where you really can't control who's there, you can't control what the energy is, you end the day drained. And so now I think, okay, I'm very careful what I read, what podcasts I listen to, who I talk to create this world that allows me to be the person that I want to be.
That feels like such a great place for us to just transition our time together and ask you to please play us out. It's been really, really beautiful to be here with you this afternoon.
It's been a joy. And just before we do that, I want to give a shout out, because I know Reena's on the board, to New Music USA. We are actually gearing donations to them on our .live at nationalsawdust.org site. They're helping us identify artists most in need for our Discovery series and helping us with the composers competition. So I hope you give them your support if you can. And we're going to leave with their music. And before we do that, next week we're featuring the work of the incredible rock star nun, Ani Choying-Droma. And she says, you have to be skillful according to the time, the place, and the people. So with no further ado, thank you, Reena and
Thank you
Vijay.
so much.
Take a moment. Take a breath. Take time. Take care. Take hope. Take heart. Take a step. Take a chance. Take courage. Take charge. Take a stand. Take pride. Take joy. Take pause.